Hello, everybody. My name's Hilary Knight. As Nihal was saying, I'm also Director of Change And, so I work with arts, culture and creative organisations around strategy, and that's not me, is it? No. Around strategy and business development, and there's usually digital innovation somewhere in the mix. And I work a lot with the Global Cultural Districts Network, which is possibly the scrap of qualification I have to be on the stage with Shanaz and Marta today. I'm just going to take a couple of minutes. I'm not going to speak for very long, I promise, because I am definitely not the expert here, just to kind of set the context of our conversation, because it's a really big topic, and we're not going to cover everything. You'll be relieved to hear, because we are the last session before lunch. So I'm just going to outline just the realm that we're going to talk about here. So cultural designation, as we all know, it's granted to cities and regions around the world by some really significant bodies, global agencies, governments at regional, local, country, state, city level. So we're thinking here from things like UNESCO Creative Cities to EU and UK Cities of Culture, and then the recently announced UK Towns of Culture as well, which will be kicking off imminently. These are sort of creative and cultural labels. They're intended to drive regeneration and stimulate local economies by increasing the vibrancy, the creative activity, and quite possibly the commercial activity as well in those areas, and by inspiring innovation in whatever form that takes, whether it's digital or something more analog, but no less innovative and different. But these cultural designations also come with risks and challenges. Now, there's an abundance of those. I'm only going to highlight three, because I think that's probably all we're going to manage to cover in this little session. The first one is the risk that cultural designation pulls focus just onto that part of the country or just to that city, and then doesn't have quite enough of a halo effect to shine a light on the areas around it, so that cultural designation benefits a specific locale, but that benefit doesn't really spread out much further than that. The second one is, as I'm sure you can expect, there's a tremendous complexity around stakeholders and participants from the global agency or government or regional or local government involved, and corporate stakeholders as well, but also, more importantly, the communities that the cultural designation is there to support, the creatives that it's there to support, and of course the audiences that it's there to reach and engage and absorb. And then the third, and I think potentially, we could debate this, the toughest risk and challenge is around the legacy of that cultural designation. Quite often, we see this with cities of culture, it's time-bound. Bradford 2025 is for 2025, and we're near the end, and we might talk a little bit about that. But what happens next? There's a long road to that year, 12 months of City of Culture. What happens afterwards, and what are the structures that can be set in place? How can systems be set up to ensure, or what is it about that cultural designation that can be leveraged to ensure that those benefits continue, and it isn't just like a light being switched off? How do we equip these places to keep going? So I promised I wasn't going to speak for very long. That's pretty much it from me. I would love to introduce you to Shanaz and Marta. I'm going to invite you to explain yourselves. In the words of Cilla Black, who are you, where'd you come from? Shanaz, I'll start with you. Can you tell us a little bit about Bradford 2025 and your work?
I really like Nihal's introduction, Force and H. I'm going to put that on my CV next. 2025, when I was asked to kind of chair the bid, I'm a local girl, born and brought up in Keighley, and Bradford's bid wasn't just for the city, because the designation shifted. So it didn't just become city. So Londonderry, Hull and Coventry were all the city. And for us, it was, could it be Bradford and district? Could it be wider? Could it be... So it was more than the city. So I take it as a gift. A challenge is also seen as an opportunity, isn't it? You have to approach these designations like that. And we have to approach our sector like that as well. So we became Bradford City and District, which means it's geographically the biggest city of culture to date in the UK. Population-wise, the biggest UK city of culture to date, so 141 square miles, a city and 4 towns and several villages. Over half a million, 570,000 population within that footprint, urban and rural. So when, as a city of culture, and I really love the 3 questions that you, and challenges that you highlighted, and I can tell everyone that our risks register when it started could have filled the entire venue. Yeah. And now, thankfully, we're on about 3 pages, which about 26 days out to the end of the year, you'd hope it would be like that. So we approached the year thinking local, regional, national, and global. Mm-hmm. Because the whole year that UK City of Culture, that city is representative of the UK. You are the UK within that year. For a city and district like Bradford, which has had a rich history and heritage, our approach was absolutely about telling those nationally significant stories that built Bradford, while also recognising that this very diverse young city is not only the historically powerful and historically important, but really important for present and future. Mm. And then within that, and that's just kind of thinking about the infrastructure around it, an incredibly international community. So the heritage, the mills, the industry, like as we know, the North has, the industry drove the North. The industry created the wealth in this city, and that was Northern. And so Bradford's was wool and mills. And so its diversity is very much related to its industry. Mm. So creating a programme that celebrated all of that, created opportunity for a very young city, one of the youngest in the UK, also trying to create opportunity for young people to step into leadership roles, to step into this sector, to create a programme that was joyous, brought people together. I think we're recognising more and more and more the power that this sector has. Mm. So when you put all of that together, in amongst all of that, you've got to start up as an organisation. You win the designation, you get about 250k, well, you used to get 250k as a start-up, raise your funds, pull together a team, a brand, a programme, and you have 2 years to do that, and you deliver the year. Yeah. So the fact that we're, still able to celebrate and see see the wood for the trees, see our audiences, see our communities, see the beating heart of the year, as well as the big show-off events that we do. Mm-hmm. But even those events have the community and the people of Bradford sat at the heart of it. So it's, again, to go back to how I started, it has to be, these designations have to be local, regional, national and international.
Yeah, and we're going to come back to a lot of that. There's so much in there I'd like to unpack. But first, Marta, I'm going to come to you because you're where Shanaz starts, Bradford 2025. Shanaz is everywhere, right? But starts in Bradford and then comes out. With LAGO Collective, you're much more working across international geographic territories. Mm-hmm. But can you introduce us a little bit to LAGO Collective, yes, and then talk about how you work?
Yes, and also in a way pick up exactly where Shanaz left with these reflections about going from the local to the regional to the national and the global, because that is very much where I'm coming from. So I started working with cities and actually with mayors, not in the cultural sector. I spent most of my professional life working on international relations, international development, global governance, and that's how I first encountered cities and mayors as actors in city diplomacy and as actors particularly in the migration space and creating connections between cities in relation to the movement of people. But I think some of this experience of working across borders in cities, I think, has something to offer to your challenge about how do we make sure that cultural designations that, of course, risk being defined by both a sector, which is culture, and a place, which is a particular city, risks not leveraging all this potential, all these connections, and ultimately undermine the legacy. So LAGO Collective is something that I founded a couple of years ago, partly realizing how much there was a desperate need in the policy space for new ways of thinking around the realities of the movement of people across borders, and how much sort of culture and creativity and the creative economy had to offer to these, highly polarizing policy issues. And then when it comes to cities, I can think of, let me just give you a couple of very concrete examples of experiences of working with cities across, in a way, culture and other sectors, and across cities in a way that I think speaks to this experience of Bradford looking out from the beginning for how Bradford connects to everything that is around it and beyond its borders. The first, and I'm thinking mostly about African and European cities and mayors who I worked with, is leveraging the role of the diaspora in the cultural sectors to create meaningful connection between cities. I'm currently involved with something called the London to Accra campaign, which has been launched by Mayor Sadiq Khan and supported by Mayor of Accra, and where the High Commission in Accra is very active, building very deliberately connection between these two global cities, anchored or bridged by Ghanaian and UK diaspora, and particularly entrepreneurs in the creative economy, and creating opportunity for exchanges, for collaborations. There will be a big summit in Accra in early January, fostering all of this. And it strikes me as something very concrete that cities can do, where you have meaningful and significant diaspora presence because of all sorts of ties and all sorts of commercial trade, historic reasons, and how to activate them in the space of the creative economy and creative industries. Using sort of the city as the place of departure, not dissimilar to what you just described, but with very clear intention of creating that connection. The second example that comes to mind is the city of Milan, which is, by the way, where I'm from, even though I lived now most of my life in London, and really quite deliberately working with the mayor of Milan first to use, and then other actors. You mentioned how many stakeholders in a city get involved in cultural designations. And I'm thinking particularly of all the ecosystem around Milan Design Week. And to really use that moment, which is probably the most significant international moment of the city of Milan, to bring in a conversation around, for example, borders and how they affect, and particularly visa policy and how they affect creatives that gather in a city in a moment of, in the creative economy. And then doing something very similar around London Design Festival this year. So the idea of identifying moments in a city life and agenda in the space of culture and the creative economy and creative industries, where you deliberately build connection on policy issues that are of interest to the city, but also to the country and the nation. And obviously there's nothing like something like borders and migration that speaks to national policy and international issues rather than local, but really to almost root them, at the local level within the space of culture and the creative economy. So I guess the idea is, how can we make sure that, as part of the legacy of cultural designation, we think about all sorts of other ways that we have to continuously bring back to the place, the city where people live, where people move, opportunities to make those connections.
Yeah. Yes, all of that. Tiny question. Shanaz, I wanted to just loop it back and start again back with the city. So you talked about it being local, Bradford 2025, local, regional, national and global by design from the start. Was that a decision that you made as Bradford, or was that part of the cultural designation? Was that a policy shift, and how did that decision come?
That was actually a decision that the bidding team at the time that we were bidding to be UK City of Culture, because I was chair, and then when we won, I resigned as chair and applied to be the creative director, because I wanted to see it from start to finish, and it was the first time actually that a City of Culture has managed to do that. So I also wanted to experiment and see what would happen, and we as an organisation wanted to give that a try that. So we made the decision from the very beginning that we were going to be international, but that international will be very much rooted within our local and our local stories. So it goes to, what Marta was saying about diaspora communities. We've been gifted with brilliant diaspora communities. We have a great Ghanaian community, we have a brilliant Pakistani community, a fantastic Bangladeshi community, Indian, and these communities, Polish, Ukrainian, one of the biggest Ukrainian communities post-World War II was in Leeds and Bradford. Wow. So there's quite a huge kind of connection globally. So how do you build on that? So when you win a designation, you start thinking about the ideas, and you know, when I talk about our sector and culture, and Marta's just brilliantly illustrated it as well, as the power of the cultural sector to innovate, and it's the opportunity, it's that kind of seed, isn't it? Yeah. That kind of helps to kind of build the ideas and build the innovation, and how to kind of create projects that create more opportunity. We've often talked about a programme a bit like Russian dolls, you know, where you take one and there's another one, you take one out and there's another one, another one out. And they also see it as a Venn diagram. That if you think outwards, everything starts coming back inwards too. And our communities have been very much at the heart of our programme. Artists have been absolutely at the heart of our programme. It can be really easy going to that question that you put, which is the halo just stays on the city. Yeah. One of the ways to kind of, that we've tried to push that is from the very beginning saying to our sector, this is an invite and an invite and a kind of to the rest of the sector to come to Bradford, celebrate this year with us. But it's also about giving you connections and opportunities to build bridges. And our international programme, less is more, deeper, more impactful, creates lasting and longer relationships. We've had a brilliant partnership with the British Council, and we did it very deliberately from the very, very beginning to ensure that our stories, our artists, was a reason that those partnerships existed. For instance, I'm going to also talk about Accra a little bit. Bronte Parsonage, known really, really well for the Brontes, for its history, has tourists coming from all over the world to it, but looking externally, not done that much. We come in as a designation, we have a brilliant conversation with the fantastic Rebecca York, who's director there, and we explore the idea of the Brontes' history, but their childhood stories. So 2 young women, 2 female writers from Bradford, 2 young writers, one from Northern Ghana and one from Accra, come together to write science fiction inspired by the Bronte sisters' stories as children. And then that partnership with Pagia Literature Festival in Accra and Bronte Parsonage hopefully will now continue. And I say hopefully because I think we've got funding for that to be a stage 2. Yeah. But 4 short stories have been created. One of these young women is a real talent. She's from Northern Ghana. But this would not have happened, this partnership wouldn't have happened, Pagia and Bronte Parsonage wouldn't have happened if we hadn't been the instigator of it, if we hadn't been that seed. Yeah,
it's really interesting. When we were speaking in advance of this session, we used the word catalyst a lot. I looked back through my notes, and catalyst was in every other paragraph, and there is something in there. And I wonder, Marta, thinking about it from a policy perspective, how can what be catalysed? What would your recommendations, or what is your experience of how these catalysts can then be taken forward so that the chemical reaction continues, I suppose, to extend the metaphor?
That's actually a really good way to think about it, sort of catalyst as a way almost to, what are the forces to avoid some of those challenges, particularly the legacy, almost the catalyst, the drivers that allow things to continue and to grow. And I think a lot of it is also on us to think a little bit differently about what we've got and we can do differently. So let me give you a couple of very concrete examples. The first is that when it comes to cities and ways of cities to collaborate across borders, we tend to have fairly standard models of doing that, right? There is Global Cities Network. We can think of numbers in different sectors, including culture, or the bilateral partnerships like cities, like, I can't think of the English word now, but I can think of the Italian one, where cities have like the partnership, like bilateral partnerships. I think there is a lot more that we can do in the space of city diplomacy and actually creating connection. One interesting one that I just began to spot in practice, because I wasn't personally aware of, is how, for example, traditional diplomacy actors, i.e. embassies and national level actors, can be activated and be active in this space. So, I mentioned to you a little bit this work on Accra and London. That has as a driving force somebody that works at the embassy in Ghana from the UK, actually spotted the idea that rather than anchoring everything on UK-Ghana relations, that was something to be leveraged if you think about the two global cities that London and Accra are, and really sort of support from almost like from using traditional diplomatic tools, that connection. The other one I just heard, for example, that now the Dutch embassy in Accra is thinking about bringing to the city of Accra a design festival that normally happens in Amsterdam. So that's one idea. How do we activate international actors and national actors? So not always rely on cities being, themselves showing up and making the case for cities, but how other actors in the international space can do that. And the other one actually is a very recent example. You mentioned I'm the chair of the Global Creative Economy Council. There are a number of members in the room today and a number of colleagues that we actually met in Jakarta a couple of months ago, where we gathered together as the Global Creative Economy Council and, with the British Council, locally, sort of in Indonesia, but also regionally, had a number of exchanges with actors in Indonesia, from the city of Jakarta, Indonesia, then with ASEAN and with the incoming chairmanship of ASEAN, which is the Philippines, that are in the room today, to really create a conversation that starts, where the creative economy is part of, let's call it a broader cultural diplomacy, international diplomacy effort. So I guess there is a real potential to think a little bit outside the box of all the, the toolbox, the tools that we have in the box, to activate cross-border collaboration within cities, that, between cities and other actors, all those stakeholders that otherwise risk crowding out the spaces at the beginning if they stay all in Bradford. But think about how much further they can travel in northern Ghana and in Accra and beyond. And so I genuinely think this is an area where, I don't know if for those of you who follow a little bit, international relations matters, everybody's coming out of the G20 and COP saying, multilateralism is still alive, just about. This sector has a lot to offer to rethink the way we create connections across borders. And I genuinely think that cities and places, not just cities, regions, places, can be a real driving force of some of that in the future.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. We have had a whirlwind splash in the pool of this conversation. That was a terrible mixed metaphor. We are out of time, so I would really love to thank you both, Shanaz and Marta. Thank you so much. That was fascinating. There's always more to talk about, so please do come and speak to us in the lunch break and coffee breaks later on today if you'd like to continue the conversation. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.